Hey guys, how you doing today? Good? Man, it is such a joy to be here with you guys. It was a couple of weeks ago. By the way, this is Aaron. This is my son. You guys say hi? Aaron came up to me. He said, "Dad, I think we should go to Waterbrook and meet the people and just have a time to be face to face." And I think it's just always better when things are more human, more relational, more personal. And so I just wanted to, first of all, just say thank you guys for all your hard work. And I know you're running a lot of books. You're working through a lot of titles. You're getting a lot of stories out there. And behind every book, there's an author who hopefully is convinced his message really matters. And he thinks or she thinks that that's the only book you should be focusing on. And that's why I'm here to tell you this is the only book you should be. Now, I tell you that what you do is really, really important. Years ago, I was asked, how do you shape culture? And one of the things that really struck me was I was in a room with about, at that time, maybe 200 billionaires, all of them Christians, all of them followers of Christ. And I'd say the majority of all the money in that room was being spent on political engagement to try to preserve culture and a deep sense of distress of where the country was going. And they brought me in accidentally to speak. And I told them, I said, you've just burned billions of dollars over the last 30 years because you cannot control culture. You can only create culture. You cannot preserve culture. You have to create culture. And the moment you hold on to a cultures from the past, you're actually relinquishing the opportunity to create a culture in the future. And one of the things that I wrote years ago was that whoever tells the best story wins. Whoever tells the best story creates the future. Whoever tells the best story actually guides the future of human history. Stories have an incredible power. It's the way that we humans translate who we are to one another. It's the way we create cultures. It's the way we create the future. And so I feel really honored to be a part of that. And I hope this book has an opportunity to impact people's lives in a unique and life-giving way. I thought maybe I'd take a minute and talk to you about the core message of The Last Arrow and maybe even a little bit about myself. What's amazing to me is when I first aspired to be a writer, I think the first major publishing company that ever signed me was Waterbrook. And through a series of things, I ended up not writing for Waterbrook, but I always somehow was attracted and drawn to the imagery of the deer and of the name. It felt elegant, it felt poetic, and I certainly understand longing after God, like the deer pants for the Waterbrook. Now that's really what writing should do. Writing should create this appetite, this thirst, this hunger. When we tell stories, that needs to be less didactic and less imposing on people, and needs to be more exposing, opening up the soul and creating a sense of hunger and longing. And I was in a conversation with an atheist who was a journalist, and the journalist asked me, what does believing in God feel like? That's such a great question. It's such an honest question from a person who is not an angry atheist, just an atheist. There are a lot of people who say they're atheists, but they're just angry at God. And then you meet someone who really is an atheist. And I remember saying to them, have you ever had those moments where maybe you've fallen in love, and all of a sudden your senses are peaked to their extreme level? Colors are brighter and aromas are richer and food tastes better and life just looks more beautiful. So that to me is what it feels like to know God. Somehow you become so fully alive that your senses are almost overwhelmed by the beauty all around you. It's as if every moment you're drinking so deeply of something so profoundly beautiful. And I long for us to have a place and a time where faith can be expressed in a way where people without God would long to know what we know. Even if they conclude we're out of our minds. Even if they conclude there's just no way there can be a God. I would much rather have it be, there isn't a God, but I don't want to be like them. I would rather have it be, there isn't a God, but oh, I wish I could be like them. I just can't believe, but I wish I could know life and be alive like them. Well, The Last Arrow is a very peculiar book for me. Every time I write a book, I kind of assume it's my last book. And when I wrote my first book, I assumed it was my last book. And I didn't know I'd ever write a book again. But I've always had this kind of morbid relationship to life and death. I think that's why when I was young, I became really attracted to the way of the samurai, and I flew to Japan a few times, and I was really attracted to Japanese culture. And so every time I wrote a book, I would always assume it would be the last book I'd ever write. And I would get on a plane and then realize this could be the last time I see my wife, last time I see my kids. And it's a strange way to live your life. But with this book, it became even more, for me, poignant. I'd finished the book a year ago, I think, or so. And in it, I tell a story, two stories. One about when my wife and I were on the border of Syria and Lebanon. And in the years past, I've been in Syria and in Pakistan and in some of the most violent places in the world. And I love walking the streets of those places. And in some peculiar way, I never find myself afraid. I just find myself so alive. But this time it was really interesting because before they took us into the refugee camps, they made us sign documents that said proof of life. And you hear about that, and you know about that, but that moment where you're having to do that right before you go in. And my wife was taking this moment really seriously because it was a serious moment, but I tend to not. And I said, proof of life. I enjoy sunrises. Proof of life. I love my steak medium rare. What really, like, what are the proofs of life? We're really, and I started thinking about, what they want is proof of existence. They want some kind of factual information that if you're kidnapped, if they have that information, they know that they have you and that you're alive. That's really reassuring. And no, they want proof of existence, not proof of life. Because I wonder how many of us, if we had to fill out a form, actually have proof of life. I wonder how many people, if they really stopped and reflect on it, would say, this is the proof that I'm alive. This is my proof of life. And that overlapped with what happened this past Christmas. I love Christmas. We love Christmas as a family. And it's one of those holidays we just really enjoy, as I think so many people do. Even before I knew Jesus, I loved Christmas, so it's great to add him to his holiday. But we were going through a process because when I had a business for years, and my business partner wanted me to have a key man policy, and in case I died, she wanted to make sure she was protected financially. And so I would go through all the testing to get a key man policy, and then I couldn't pass the test. But I felt healthy, I felt strong, I felt like I was fine. I played basketball, I did all the things I was supposed to do. And I had some things that I would fight privately. I wouldn't tell anyone that I wasn't feeling great. And I'd feel overwhelmed with exhaustion, but I would just fight my way through it. And then sometimes it would hit me so hard that I felt like I have 2 or 3 good hours right now, but I'm gonna just power my way through it. And I grew up just learning how to work hard, so you just work hard. And then every test I took said there was something wrong with me, but they couldn't find anything wrong with me. So I went from doctor to doctor to doctor, not to find out what was wrong with me, because I was sure there was nothing wrong with me. And I wanted that key man policy. So finally, I called a doctor friend of mine, and I said, look, I need to pass these tests. I need you to help me get this key man policy. And it's kind of unethical, and she was letting me know that as a doctor, she couldn't give me a passing grade. And I said, why not? They do that to athletes. And why can't you do that for me? And she goes, look, I know a doctor who can help you. He'll get you validated, approved for life insurance. And so I went to this retired doctor in his 80s, and he was really relaxed and really chill. And he goes, okay, we're going to do some testing just so that we can go through the process, but we've got you covered and everything. And so I had some tests, and he looked at me and goes, there's something wrong with you. I can't approve you for life insurance because there's something wrong with you. I said, yeah, but I'm healthy, I'm fine. And he goes, I don't know what it is, but there is something wrong with you. He goes, I've been doing this a long time. So we just need to do more tests. So I did more tests and did tests I don't even want to remember, and tests that just steal all your dignity. And then they said we need to do a biopsy, and in my mind, I thought, great, let's just get this out of the way. So I went in and did 8 different localized biopsies. And then 2 weeks before Christmas, they were going to give me the results. I was so sure that they were going to tell me everything was fine that I called my kids and we were going to meet at a restaurant. We're going to celebrate my, life insurance policy. And then this time I was doing it for Mosaic for our church. I wanted to make sure that if I died, the church would be taken care of. And my wife and I went to the doctor's office. We sat down and he looked at me and he said, you have cancer. And he said 5 of the 8 places we tested are malignant and it's metastasized. And we don't know how far it's spread, but we know that it's, you've probably had it for 10 years. It's one of those strange things where for 10 years everybody says you're fine, but you can't find what's wrong with you. And then it just seemed like it just decided to accelerate really quickly, and you probably have friends that have had similar situations. And I looked at my wife Kim right next to me, and she just looked devastated. And frankly, I think I felt more about how she felt than how I felt. Because when he said it, it was for me almost like as if you're watching someone else's life. And I didn't feel distress or anything like that at all. And then I made the mistake of telling our kids in the restaurant that it came out that I had cancer. And it was not a great moment for us, a really hard moment for us as a family. Went home, very emotional night. Everybody went to sleep. I picked up the manuscript because I'm not going to go to sleep and I was about halfway through the manuscript, so I just opened it up to the next page that I was supposed to edit. And the first line I read, and this is pretty close to exact words, but I don't remember how we finished it, but this is the first line I read. I need to tell you before you hear it from someone else, I'm dying. That was the first line I read on the night they told me I had cancer. And when I read that, I was so shocked. I don't even remember writing it. And I'd written it probably a year before, that I underlined it and highlighted it, and I wrote the date down so I could remember I read that on the day they told me I had cancer. That how surreal that I wrote this a year before they told me I had cancer. On the day where that statement may be a real practical and imminent reality. But the next line for me was more important. Right after I said, I need to tell you before you hear it from someone else that I'm dying. I won't tell you the next line. You'll have to read the book. I guess I'll tell you. And it says, but so are you. And I wrote that, and I told the whole story about not being able to get life insurance, the whole story about proof of life. Because I wrote this book because now that I'm almost 60 years old, I've lived long enough to have a lot of friends that I've journeyed with. And so many people who had extraordinary talent and capacity and intelligence and potential. And frankly, I was never the guy people chose. I was never the person people picked. When you're going to put your money on someone's future, it was not my future. But the people I knew that had so much talent and potential and capacity, they just seemed to somewhere along the way drift off and vanish. And their lives almost became like a vapor. And I started feeling this incredible sense of sadness because you start losing friends simply because their lives became trapped in a time in history that is not the present or the future. And a huge part of the motivation of this book was that I just felt that the greatest resource that God had ever given the world are human beings. That what God wants to give to the world, what God wants to give to humanity, what God wants to use to solve the human problems, the great issues in life, exists inside of us. And so oftentimes we look for God to solve the problems with material out there, but the material that God uses most is the material in here. That what is it about us that underestimates who we are and what God wants to do in our lives? Why is it that whenever someone tells you you can't, it sticks to you longer than the person who tells you that you can? Why is it that all the voices in the past that tells us what we're not, those voices seem to stay with us for a lifetime? But then the voices that tell us that we have capacity, potential, talent, we have something special, those voices, they seem to be diminished inside of our soul. In some ways, it seems like all the negative information that shapes us has a more profound stickiness to us than the information that inspires us and encourages us and gives us hope. So I wanted to write the last arrow because I began to delineate between those individuals who seem to somehow squeeze every aspect of their life. They do as Yeats says, they suck the marrow out of life. And then those people who you always think they have such great potential, but they never live up to it. Or that internal desperation inside of us that says, I know there's more in me, but I don't know how to get it out of my soul. I was thinking today how if we were going to name one of the most impoverished and desperate countries in the world, it would be Venezuela right now. But if we were going to name what country had the greatest resource of oil reserves in the world, we probably wouldn't think Venezuela. And yet Venezuela is both one of the richest countries in the world and one of the poorest countries in the world at the exact same time. You see, I'm convinced most human beings are Venezuela. We live with an abject poverty of the soul, but inside of us we have unlimited resources for greatness, to do something that matters, to make a difference in the world. And that for me is the focus of the last arrow. It came out of a story in the scriptures. I love the fact that I grew up as a pagan, because I'd never read the Bible, I never went to church, so I didn't know any stories, They were all brand new. I'm a first timer for every single story in the Bible. So every time I read them, I went, wow, there's a guy named Moses, it was really epic for me all the way along the way. And this only struck me years ago, because when I was a new follower of Christ and I was talking about someone in the Old Testament, one of my friends came up to me and said, you know what I love about you talking about Nebuchadnezzar? I go, what? I know you just met him for the first time. That's true. I'm meeting all these people for the first time. Where there's this moment where Elisha, right before he dies, is talking to King Jehoash, and he says to the king, take the arrow and strike it through the window, which right away, I'm right there, and I see the arrow flying through the window, and I see everything sort of 360 degrees, so I'm right there in the room with them. And then Elisha says, now take the arrow and strike. And he takes the arrow, and in a very unorthodox way, because you're supposed to shoot an arrow, but he starts striking the arrow. And he strikes the arrow 1, 2, 3 times, and 3 is kind of like a perfect number in the Bible, right? 3, 7, 12, you skip all the other numbers, right? And then you go to 40, right? Those are all the big numbers, so you either strike 3, 7, 12, or 40. But so he strikes 3, something perfect number, right? And I remember even when I was briefly Roman Catholic, I was 10 years old, and my mom suddenly told us we're going to Mass, and I went to confirmation and First Communion, because she wanted to make sure, that if they were right, we were in. And I went through First Communion, and they told me to memorize all these prayers, but I didn't. But I accidentally memorized the Lord's Prayer, which we called the Our Father. And then you have to go through your first confession. And I went into the little cubicle, and I said to the priest, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. This is my first confession. And then he said his spiel, and he told me to confess my sins. And I said, I don't have any. I wasn't really into full disclosure at that time, And, I didn't know the priest. I didn't know if he knew my mom. I didn't know if this was sort of like a clever con of how to get data out of you. And so I said, I don't have any. And the priest got a little upset at me because, I realized that, and this is what I was thinking. I think, his employment's based on my sin. And so if I don't have sin, he doesn't have a job. And so, I said, I don't have any. And he sort of encouraged me. And I said, well, I've got one sin, but I'm not going to tell you. And because I tried to run away from home just a few months before that, but I had mapped it out. I'm not one of those, kids that just decides to run away because it's an emotional thing. I mapped it out. I saved money for quite a long time. I figured out where the home for the homeless were, where the YMCA was, where I could live in the woods. And so I went to run away. I got caught, and they locked me in the room. And I remember saying, you're supposed to let me run away. Remember? This is the psychology of children. You're supposed to let me run away. I fail. I come back because I'm afraid. And my mom said, I know you. You're so stubborn. You'll never come back. And she was right. I would have never come back. And so they caught me. I was stuck in a room, and I was so mad. I went, Jesus, you're so stupid. That was profanity for me. And I kind of yelled at God and cussed him out. And that was my sin. I didn't want to tell the priest. I didn't even believe in God. I didn't even know who Jesus was. I just heard his name, and he was the closest thing I could connect to God. And I thought, and the reason I yelled at God was I thought, God seems to be either non-existent or absolutely indifferent. And he doesn't seem to have any interest in involving himself in my life when I'm in pain. So maybe if I can tick him off, maybe if I can offend him, I can get a reaction from God. So I tried to offend God to get him involved in my life. He was non-responsive. And that was the moment I decided not to believe anymore. Well, going through that whole process, this king, all connects back together. He strikes the arrow 3 times. Oh, by the way, at my first communion, I walked up and I said to God, God, I forgot all the other prayers, but I remember this Our Father, and he told me to pray it like 80, 90 times because he was so mad. I said, I'm not going to pray it 80 or 90 times. That doesn't make any sense to me. So I said, I'm going to pray it 3 times, once for you, once for your son, and once for the Holy Spirit. So I prayed 3 prayers in my first communion, and I figured that was enough for God. So I understand why King Jehoash struck the arrow 3 times. You see how it all connects? And then he stops, and Elisha gets angry. That's not right. Why would he get angry when he doesn't even tell the king how many times? And it really bothers me when we just accept things in the Bible when they don't really make sense. And then he says, why did you stop? Why didn't you strike the arrow 5 or 6 times? He said, now you're only going to have a partial victory, but if you had struck it 5 or 6 times, you would have had a complete victory. And I'm going, then say something up front. Say, strike 6 times. You get complete victory. 3 times you get half victory. Right? I mean, say something, explain to me, because don't you feel sometimes God doesn't tell you enough for you to get it right? And I thought, this is exactly how I think most of us feel. But then it hit me that Elisha's mindset read that situation different than Joash. And this is exactly how we live our lives. See, Elisha had gone through a process in his life where he strikes when he's told to strike, and he doesn't stop until God tells him to stop. Joash did just enough where he thought it was enough. I was pressed with this question. I wonder how many times I've quit when I thought I failed. I wonder how many times in our lives we thought this was all God had for us. And God kept wondering why we were asking for so little, why we were settling for so little. And then I didn't know this when I wrote the book. I don't know if you noticed, but the book ended up as a study of Elisha's life. That's not how the book started. I don't really write, I write backwards. I know the end, and then I discover the middle and the beginning when it's all over. And I realized this is a study in the life of Elisha. This is really trying to understand what is it in Elisha's mindset that allowed him to come to the place that he knew to strike 6 times and not to stop at 3. Then I began seeing how in his life, even with the widow, he says to her, you know, what do you have? And she says, I have oil. When she's going to die of starvation, he says, go get all the jars you can from all your friends and neighbors. Get all these worthless jars. And then he says, and don't get just a few. I thought, there it is. There's like the key to the last arrow. Don't get just a few. When God's going to act in your life, you need to make sure that you have as many jars available for him to pour everything he wants to pour into your life. And it's really key because when God begins to pour the oil over and over and over again with just a little bit of oil she had, it didn't stop flowing until she ran out of containers. I wondered, how many times does God want to pour more and more into our lives? But maybe we feel guilty because God's done so much. Or maybe we don't understand the generosity of God. Or maybe we've been twisted by American capitalism, that we don't want to become these hedonistic, greedy capitalists, so we don't ask God for more. And we don't realize that what God wants to pour into your life isn't just for you, it's for everyone that your life touches. And that's when I felt like the last arrow was so important to write, why I felt it was so significant. And it was really surreal to write a book called The Last Arrow. One of my unbelieving friends, in fact, the one who made this necklace, he's not a believer yet. He's from Israel. He's a designer. And he was going to design an arrow for me for this book. But he texted me, goes, please change the name of the book. I'm terrified you're going to die. Because when he found out I had cancer, he was afraid for me. And I think that this is the challenge. And I can tell you this, when I went through this process, I gave myself permission to be mad, to be angry, to be bitter, to be afraid. I didn't want to be one of those people that pretended he wasn't feeling something. And I felt like it was really important for me to give other people who are going through what I'm going through the freedom to feel whatever they need to feel. Because you were not all the same, right? But I don't know why. I never felt afraid. Not for 1 second. Not from the moment they spoke it into reality or the moment when I was under the knife. I never felt bitter. I never felt anger. And as I was editing the book and I went back and rewrote the intro and wrote a new ending, I realized something was actually real. One, I was able to tell our community, Jesus is everything he promised me he would be. You don't know until moments like that. But there was something else I realized, that a long time ago, early on in my spiritual journey, I had a moment with God, and he challenged me to put death behind me instead of in front of me. And in this moment, I realized it was actually true. We fear death because we have never lived, because we've never been fully alive. We are so afraid that death is the reality and that life is the illusion. And a part of what Jesus wants to do in us is to make life the reality and death the illusion. And I'm excited. I've never really been, I think, so leaned into a book in my life. I am convinced the message of this book is really important. Not just so that we have a proper relationship to life and death, but so that the people of Jesus won't be Venezuela, always asking God to save their lives, never using the resources they have to save the lives of others.